Hello and welcome to the Ecomodernist channel live. I'm Carl Pauls. I'm here with Chris Bergen and our special guest. Mike Conley is a writer living in the hills of Echo Park, just down the street from Dodger Stadium. He's fascinated by science, and he's been that way since he was a child. Mike was drawn to the ingenuity, simplicity, and safety of the molten salt reactor. To learn more, he became a member of the Thorium Energy Alliance, a close-knit community of nuclear advocates. His approach to the people he's met through the Thorium Energy Alliance is simple. If they explain their technology to him, he'll explain it to the world. Roadmap to Nowhere is the first of Mike's books, and his new book is Earth is a Nuclear Planet. We previously interviewed Stephen Boyd, who did the science editing on that. So Mike, welcome. I hope you're having a great day.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, I got a nice 4th of July weekend. Finally sunny weather in LA after 2 weeks of rain and 6 weeks of cloudy days. Southern California, solar, yo.
Yeah.
It's just like, what are they going to do, you know? I mean, seriously, honestly, 2 weeks of rain daily and 6 solid weeks of overcast skies.
June gloom doesn't
It was June gloom. It was
yeah.
May gray. It was April horror. I mean, it was, yeah.
And now we got the forest fires coming here up in Seattle, even though we don't have really good solar as good as Texas or California. It's going to be even worse because we have the haze of those spring, summer fires coming in.
Exactly. And then just wait for a hailstorm, then takes care of all the panels of one swell foop.
This pretty much is the banter that surrounds the idea that 100% renewables, you know, while a wonderful, fantastic goal, is not a practical solution to our future energy needs. And
it's a nice idea. It's a nice idea, but it doesn't play out in practice when you start doing the math. As we say in the first book, the more you pencil it out, the sketchier it gets. Yeah. You said my first book, Roadmap to Nowhere, Tim and I wrote that in 2017. And then we realized all the pushback we were getting, the negative pushback basically centered around nuclear is dangerous and it's expensive. And what do you do with the waste? And all radiation is harmful. And therefore, even though everything you said about renewables versus nuclear makes sense, we can't do nuclear. So screw you. And we're like, damn, you know, what it comes down to is people were just afraid of nuclear power, and we would have to address that so those fears would be quelled so we can then have a sensible discussion about the first book. So we wrote like what we call a prequel, which is the first one that's going to be published. The prequel is Fear of a Nuclear Planet, and it basically prepares people to be able to read Roadmap to Nowhere and absorb it rationally rather than, yeah, but what about this? Yeah, but what about that? Yeah, but what about this?
I just want to clarify, you mentioned Tim, that's Dr. Timothy Maloney.
Yes. Tim is my
electrical engineer by training, I think.
Yeah, he is a retired electrical engineer, and he's my co-author, and he does like all the hard math, and I pretty much write the narrative, and he pretty much does the deep research, fact verification, math. We take on exercises ourselves, and then he does the math. For example, how many solar panels would it take to produce the same amount of energy that, for example, Vermont Yankee produced over its many years, and it's jaw-dropping. So that's where Tim shines. He just grinds on that stuff into the deepest details, and then I translate it for the regular reader to absorb.
Mm-hmm. You come up with all these wild catchphrases to make it simplistic. Can you shoot a couple at us that come from both books, maybe?
Well, one is, you know, make energy, not war. We're strongly in favor of nuclear power, and we think that you ought to dismantle every bomb on the planet and use the pit for reactor fuel. You know, so that's one of our memes: is make energy, not war.
Right?
Is that the kind of groovy thing you want me to say?
Oh yeah,
Those
sure.
Yeah,
I'm 100% there. This is something that I'm happy to go along with. You know, I sometimes will debate the idea with the revolutionary left who think that every country should have nuclear weapons. There's a weird crossover of the conservative and the leftist mindset.
It loops around, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. The
Yeah.
horseshoe theory kind of does
Yes,
work.
exactly.
In this case.
Every country should have nuclear reactors. And the first sentence in Earth is a Nuclear Planet is that an American has a better chance of being shot by their own dog than being harmed by nuclear power. That's statistically verifiable. There's about one American each year that gets shot by their own dog. The dog steps on the trigger and the gun goes off and the owner gets wounded. In fact, about 3 months ago, some guy and his friend were driving on a hunting trip and the dog's in the back seat, steps on the trigger. What the gun was doing in the back seat is another matter. The dog steps on the trigger and shoots the friend and the friend dies. This stuff happens every year. And the number of fatalities of American nuclear power is 16 in 70 years of commercial nuclear power.
Does that include these ridiculous deaths like the loading dock at 3 Mile Island?
No.
This is like 16 total ever.
Casualty count in American nuclear power is 3 technicians died when an experimental reactor at Idaho National Lab melted down in 1961. 10 Americans have died in construction and inspection accidents at nuclear power plants that were not radiation related.
Okay.
The guy fell on a bunch of rebar or whatever, or the inspector fell off the edge of the cooling tower. And there have been 3 casualties and 3 serious injuries at fuel processing facilities.
Right.
Yeah. And that's all we've been able to find. If there's more valid mortalities or fatalities, we'd like to hear about it. We'll weave it into the book, but that's all we've been able to find. Mm-hmm. And that's 16, and 10 of which are non-radiation related in 70 years of American nuclear power, whereas there's about 1 person that gets shot each year by their own dog, factoring in population differences and the fact that there weren't as many guns per capita 30, 40, 50 years ago. I think you could safely say that since the advent of American nuclear power, there's maybe been about 35 dog-related shootings.
Yeah. So there's this 1 death at 3 Mile Island in 2021, the loading dock. Right as soon as they started to decommission it, they added a lot of personnel, probably didn't have perfect training. Someone died at the loading dock, from what I understand.
Right. So then there would be 11 non-radiation related rather than 10. So the count is 17. And our point still stands.
Yeah.
You have a far greater chance by statistics, by actual statistics, of being shot by your own dog than being harmed by American nuclear power.
Yeah. Right. And
that's why we wrote Earth as a Nuclear Planet, is because you're trying to talk to somebody about renewables versus nuclear, and they're all like, oh my God, it's dangerous. Oh my God, it's dangerous. And they can never read the damn book because they're not there with the book. There's all this crap going on in their head. So we address all that stuff by basically writing a prequel to Roadmap to Nowhere, which is an examination of 100% nuclear versus 100% renewable grid. So the prequel to that is Earth is a Nuclear Planet. Nuclear power has been demonized, thoroughly demonized by bad science, which we abbreviate as BS. And so we in Earth is a Nuclear Planet, we dive into where's the fear coming from? What are the real statistics? What's the real science? How dangerous is this compared to other things? Like, I can't remember the numbers. I have to look it up in the book, but thousands of American males die each year in America from aspirin ingestion. And it's like, well, what are you going to do? Ban aspirin? What are you going to do? Ban dogs? You're not going to ban guns in this country, and you're not going to ban dogs. So I guess the question is how perfect does a power source have to be for you to be dissuaded of the wondrous efficacy of 100% wind and solar, which we pick apart in our book, Roadmap to Nowhere, which we're rewriting now. So Roadmap to Nowhere was written in 2017. Then we go, oh my God, everybody's afraid of nuclear power. So we wrote Earth is a Nuclear Planet. And we're also revising Roadmap to Nowhere, which will come out a couple of months from after Earth as a Nuclear Planet comes out, which is about the middle of August. And we revised Roadmap to Nowhere because Mark Jacobson revised his roadmap. And I don't know if you want to get into talking about that. I don't want to jump around all too much, but
no, that would be great. Jacobson had this miraculous study that said, oh my gosh, we just have to uprate a little bit on the hydro and we can be 100% renewable. Never mind that in Washington, we don't even think hydro is renewable. It's by statute, it's not considered renewable. We're trying to tear down some dams all over the place here in the Pacific Northwest, but just jack those up a little bit, rebuild the dams we tore down in Oregon, and we'll be fine. What were the problems with that study?
Well, Jacobson first came out in 2015 with his roadmap. Then he revised it in 2019, and then he revised it yet again in December of 2021, which is why, well, now we have to revise Roadmap to Nowhere, and we did. And luckily this time he put all his numbers in the thing, so we don't have to back everything we say by walking people through all the math that he's already done. So thank you, Mark. The efforts of Mark Jacobson and his roadmap crew have made it much easier to explain to the American public why 100% renewable is an entirely infeasible, daffy idea. So thank you, Mark. You made my job easier. Mark Jacobson's plan is 98.8% wind and solar. So it's a wind and solar plant. He has a little bit of ice storage and hot water storage. And I'm like, oh, that's cute. You know, it's like it's all inclusive, but basically it's a 98.8% wind and solar plan. And it's about, I think about 60 solar and 40 wind or vice versa. And I'm doing all this from memory. He proposes about half the land that National NREL proposes, National Renewable Energy Lab. But we took Jacobson's numbers rather than NREL's numbers. So we went through, we took Jacobson's numbers and we penciled it all out. And here's the summary. He wants 46,000 square miles, 25,000 square miles of solar, and then another 25,000 square miles of wind. The numbers are off the top of my head. And then he has about 46,000 square miles offshore for wind. And he wants 3,000 square miles of rooftop. Now that's actually the size of the roof and panels. So the number of panels is 10.6 billion panels with a B. And we measured that according to the specs that he has in his plan, and those specs perfectly match the SunPower E2327 panel. There's a specific panel to SunPower. It's a good panel. It's like the Mercedes of panels, you know, the Buick. But anyway, it's a good panel, and we used that panel and his land numbers and came up with what we came up with. And then what we did is we said, well, you know, reactors last for 80 years. To really get apples and oranges out of the picture and do apples to apples, we figured, okay, his plan running for 80 years with maintenance and replacement of panels and wind, and how many overall, and how much cost, and how much land, and how much volume of waste, compared to a grid with the same amount of gigawatts. He has 1,179 is his theorized gigawatt need for primary energy in 2050. We go, okay, let's build a 1,179 gigawatt nuclear grid, add some more for weather variations and this, that, and the other. And we compared the price of them, and his renewables grid is between 25 and 50% more expensive than an 80-year nuclear grid. And an 80-year nuclear grid will take at the most 1,500 square miles of land, probably much less. And it will be predominantly sited on brownfield sites, which are old coal and gas plants and aging nuclear plants. And another thing you mentioned, dams being dismantled. Any place where a hydropower dam, when it gets dismantled, the transmission facility is still there and the transmission corridor is still there.
Mhm.
So dismantle the dam and put a reactor there, and you can have run of the river and 24/7 power with an existing corridor. And so what we figured out is we wouldn't need any new corridors. In fact, corridor mileage would probably shrink, because with local nuclear, you don't need to have wires coming in from hither and yon through the city. That land could be returned to the locals to be developed. So actually the transmission network would shrink with nuclear, and you have to upgrade the quality of the existing transmission anyway. No matter what you do, our transmission system has to be upgraded. So we didn't factor in that cost. But he's used Princeton's Net Zero America to figure out what transmission Jacobson needs, because Jacobson, and this is a direct quote from his paper, his roadmap plan, quote, assumes perfect transmission, end quote.
I remember that. Mm-hmm.
Good, Chris.
Okay.
Yeah. Quick question, just for clarification here. You and Tim, to make sure you didn't misunderstand him initially, you exchanged several emails with Dr. Jacobson, right?
No, not several. I think maybe about 3. Tim went back and forth with him on his land calculations. And I think the upshot of it, we decided, well, the hell with it. We're going to accept Jacobson and his team at their word, rather than pick an argument about land density, because then he has no rebuttal. If we take his numbers, he has no rebuttal. There's 2 sets of numbers that we imported into his package. One is he did not include operation and maintenance for his lithium batteries, and he has a buttload of lithium batteries, enough to run the entire national primary energy grid that he theorizes in 2050. He can run the entire nation for 13 hours. That's a lot of lithium. Okay. So we imported that number from, I think, NREL. He thinks that lithium is going to be like lithium batteries would be like $60 a kilowatt hour in 2050. Everybody else is saying 150, 180, 230. We said, okay, the hell with it. We'll just take his number as $60, and then we're going to prorate that discount with NREL's estimate of what it costs for operation and maintenance. We gave that number a 60% discount as well. So we were bending over backwards to give him the benefit of the doubt. And then the other thing we imported is the transmission estimate by Princeton's study of Net Zero America, which we thought was very thorough, that they go into where you're going to build 100% renewable grid by 2050. This is how much transmission you're going to need. And we added that into his plan because he said he assumed perfect transmission. And the only way we thought that his assumption would be justified is if he was operating under the presumption that any other national grid like his, therefore, the grid would have to be expanded for anyone's proposal, because he was just assuming, well, everybody is talking wind and solar, therefore, we don't have to factor that into our grid. So we said, well, you do for us, because we don't need the transmission you're going to need, so you're going to have to pay for that. So we added 3.2 trillion to his plan. Even if you take that out, if you disagree with us, his plan is still about 20%, 15% more expensive than ours. I think a little bit more. I'm trying to remember all these numbers. Tim's the guy for that. He's like the number machine. So other than those 2 aspects, which is operation and maintenance for lithium batteries, and he has 15 terawatts of lithium batteries. I mean, it's just like this, oh my God, Other than that, every single number that we use to examine his stuff comes directly from his papers. Okay. And so 80-year grid, as he designed it, is like about 39 trillion. And an 80-year nuclear grid that will deliver the same power on a postage stamp of land and a minuscule pile of waste would be, I think, 27 or 8 trillion. So it's about 10 trillion cheaper. And then we also figure out, well, what if we use molten salt? at 2,000 installed kilowatt instead of 3,000. We give a price for that. And then there's also the construction methods that Thorcon and Seaborg are doing, which Thorcon says it'll lower their cost to 1,200 an installed kilowatt. And so we said, well, if that happens, then here's another discount. So we can get our grid down to about, I think, 22 trillion versus his, with all the discounts we gave him, somewhere in the mid 30s, 34, 35, something like that. So we're safely about $10 trillion cheaper than him over an 80-year basis on about 10 or 15% of the land, and with a waste volume that is maybe 1% of his. Because we take a look at the volume of waste of panels, and it's shocking. It's jaw-dropping, the volume of solar panel waste that it would take to generate the same energy as a power plant. Like we took Connecticut Yankee, and that famous picture.
Yankee.
Connecticut Yankee.
There's multiple
Connecticut.
There's multiple Yankee reactors. Yeah, Vermont Yankee is another one, because we go into like how dangerous was the tritium water at Vermont Yankee. And according to Tim's calculations, a person would have to drink 3 gallons of the tritiated water that leaked out of Vermont Yankee every day of their life to match the radiation that is already in that person's body as a result of the potassium that you store as a normal part of your diet.
Again.
And of course, Fukushima, the radiation is more intense with the tritium water. You would have to drink a half a pint a day to match, because you have radioactive potassium in your body, and it has a certain becquerel count. It has a certain radiation intensity, and it's all measurable, and it's inarguable. And the thing about drinking lithium tritiated water, it passes right through you. The tritium doesn't hook up with your cells. It's not bioassimilable. So you have to drink it every day to keep that radiation in your body. And so basically a half a pint of tritiated Fukushima water or 3 gallons of Vermont Yankee water to match what you already have in your body. And the Vermont Yankee was not shut down because of the tritium water, but it was a big protesting point that swayed the community, and it was complete BS, bad science.
We saw this happen at Indian Point. Indian Point 3's decommissioning is now being impacted by a New York state legislature bill on the same point. Never mind that they were constantly releasing tritium while they were operational. This is another nothing burger. It
exactly.
Is a natural background isotope. Where does it come from?
Tritium is produced by cosmic rays. The total amount of tritium at Fukushima that they want to dump into the ocean is equal to about 6 months of tritium production by cosmic rays in the upper atmosphere.
There's even more that comes from our detonation of nuclear weapons, I understand.
I think there's a little bit of that, yeah, but it's all in the book, folks. You can read it in the book. But we used to call the book Fear of a Nuclear Planet, and then we decided it would be a little groovier title to say Earth is a nuclear planet, because Earth actually is a nuclear planet. In fact, we literally, actually, physically would not freaking be here. We would not exist, human beings, on this planet if this was not a nuclear planet. The radioactive material that is in the core, which is a lot of potassium and uranium and thorium and a few other groovy things, keeps the core molten. The circulating core creates the magnetic shield, which deflects the solar wind, which would otherwise strip our atmosphere. Mars has no atmosphere because it doesn't have a circulating core and thus no magnetic shield. And so if Elon wants to go and terraform Mars, the amount of oxygen he's going to have to make and nitrogen to make a breathable atmosphere is going to get stripped away by the solar wind. I think it's a fool's paradise, quite frankly. We are so lucky to live on a planet with a molten nuclear core, and it's hot because it's nuclear, and therefore it's molten, therefore it circulates, therefore we have a magnetic shield, therefore we have an atmosphere, therefore we have life forms. So Earth is a nuclear planet, and we need to learn how to responsibly utilize the material that's giving us the ability to have a livable planet instead of running in fear from it. So that's sort of the point of the book.
You've been in California for a while. You've been surrounded by environmentalists. What do you think is a core thing that environmentalists should be able to come around that we might be missing right now? Should we have a way to live in peace with nature or near nature?
Well, I think the best way to fix the planet is to let it be. And that is to minimize our footprint on it. We have 8 billion people. We're going to have 10 billion in another 30 years, unless there's some sort of monstro die-off. But we're looking at about 9 or 10 billion people by 2050, and they're not going to go away. And they're going to get their energy however they have to get their energy to get the lights on to get to work. And that's just reality. And I think that environmentalists have to wake up to some hard, cold facts. It's going to for the lifestyle that this planet has just today, with billions of people in poverty and a couple lucky people like me being able to have computers and cars, we're going to need about 20 terawatts of power. It's not even math, it's arithmetic, and we have to get that from somewhere.
But what about the degrowth? What about just going back to nature, like hunting the buffalo? Can't we all just hunt the buffalo?
That's going to require a die-off of about 7 billion people, and it's a juvenile fantasy to think that we can degrowth. How are you going to keep them down on the farm now that they've seen Paris? When human beings see like groovy, cool things like cell phones and motorcycles and refrigerators, you're not going to stop them from trying to get them. And they're going to get them and they're going to power them however they have to power them so they can watch something on their phone and they can have a cold drink in the fridge and they can drive to work. You're going to have to revamp human nature to get everybody turn into Thoreau. But even Thoreau said he needed civilization to make the axe that he used at the Walden Pond.
He didn't have a smelter.
He didn't have a smelter. He didn't have a forest of trees that were cut down to make the charcoal or a bunch of coal that was dug out of the ground. Europe used to be an vast, unbroken forest, and the medieval folks cut them all down for the wood. And a big chunk of that wood went into making the armor for knights. It takes a couple of thousand trees to be cut down and turned into charcoal to make the steel for one knight's armor.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things we point out, I think, is in Earth is a Good Planet, that happy medieval scenario of the cheery Christmas hearth, that was a fortune in wood for that one evening of camaraderie and celebration. That was a feast of energy to have a cheery, warm Christmas hearth. That's how scarce wood was. That's how scarce energy was. Until coal came along, wood and muscle, that was the most energy dense stuff man had. And muscle is very low tech, is self-transportable, and coal was the thing that finally beat it out. And coal is where we got onto the whole industrial civilization kick. And humanity's not going back. And so all these environmentalists that are thinking we're going to degrowth, it's just like, how? Who? It's hippie BS. Bad science is what it is.
Yeah.
I will mention briefly that Our World in Data suggested around 2068 we may have a maximum 9-point-something billion people, and because young kids are not having lots of babies, we may start to degrowth that way. And our former guest, Michaud, I believe, thought it would be about a decade or so earlier than that. Those are statistics, and we can't be sure of them yet because they haven't happened, obviously. But there is the possibility we could have a very slow degrowth.
Yeah, but we're not going to get it down to levels to where it's feasible to run the country, the world on wind and solar. If we have a degrowth, we're like at 8 now, and we go up to 9 and back down to 8, we're still at 8.
Having low population is itself a complication. It is not something that we are ready for by any stretch of the imagination. When people my age are going back to work in the trades, because of the efficiencies of the knowledge culture is about to collapse because of large language model AI, we're going to see so many people doing just menial trades. And then
Mhm.
what happens when the robots finally arrive and replace these things, or home fabrication arrives, and we have so few jobs, the economy is just going to be completely upset in the future, and
Yeah.
we're not replacing. Even India, even parts of China are not replacing human beings
Hmm.
as fast as we need to keep our
Hmm.
economy moving, to keep the production
Japan.
moving. Yeah, Japan's.
Japan's a great example, is what, the second, third largest economy in the world, and they're aging. And how are you going to
Yes.
take care of those people? And then you have climate change. You have people flooding up north here from Central America. And I'm looking at this, and it's like the only way you have a ghost of a chance of making any beneficial change in a situation like this is lots and lots and lots of cheap, clean energy.
Hmm.
And so we're either going to have a die off of about 7 billion people, everybody's Thoreau, or we're going to have to figure out how to continue what we're doing with the smallest footprint possible. And the problem with wind and solar, it is a fundamentally opposite idea to what we need, because it requires a massive contact, a massive and continual contact with the environment.
Hmm.
It's also utterly 100% totally dependent on favorable weather, favorable, of course, to that particular technology, right? There was
Yeah.
with a solar farm that just got wiped out about a week ago in Missouri or someplace with a hailstorm. And so you have your passive energy harvesters that are in full contact with the environment on a massive scale to catch whatever ever floats by. We call it a cargo cult approach to power. That if you build enough energy islands and pray to the gods, this groovy energy will come your way for free. And that's all well and good. But here's the deal. We know what our weather patterns are today. We don't know what they're going to be like in 30 years. And to make a multi-billion, if not trillion-dollar commitment for X amount of wind and solar in X, Y, and Z place, well, what if Texas turns into the monsoon state and the northern tiers become the northern doldrums? And it has such a low energy return on energy investment to begin with, wind and solar, that if you have to pull up stakes and move it, you're going to bleed whatever energy profit you
Hmm.
get. It doesn't make sense when you think it through. Because what
Right.
they're doing is they're going from combustion to pre-combustion by relying on passive energy harvesting instead of active energy production. And we have to go
Hmm.
beyond combustion rather than back off from combustion to a pre-combustion state of wind. And well, solar wasn't really that big back in the day, but wind was used for pushing ships around and for grinding corn. So it's fundamentally, philosophically, in my view, an ill-considered idea to try to strategize how to run a country, a region, or a planet on passive energy harvesting, particularly in a future of ever more unpredictable weather, because it's entirely dependent on favorable weather. The storage systems are entirely dependent as well, because if you have wind and solar feeding the storage system, then the storage system is just as dependent on weather as the energy harvesting system.
I'm a big believer in personal electric vehicles, something smaller than a
Mhm.
car. And so let's get that out of the way. These cars with their dozens to hundreds of amp hour batteries, and I've got, I think it's 20 amp hour 2 kilowatt battery system in my bicycle that will take me, maybe if I put as much muscle power into that as I possibly can, I think I can get 40 miles out of it. And this might be a solution for the future, but that requires enormous technological investment. It requires a really great infrastructure and a really dense housing in order to bring us closer together. We've allowed cars to push all of our amenities of urban living further and further away. So there's this
Yes.
overall eco-modern theme and urbanist theme that I'm developing, and it all works together. And at the core of that is we're pushing adoption and refinement of technology, and that is away from muscle power, combustion power, and including some wind and solar where it makes sense, but more
Where it makes
and more
sense,
and more
sure.
nuclear, every clean energy source possible. That's going to be the number one. And so the alternatives we see going backwards, more disease and death, more cancer from particulate matter. The fear equation between, oh, nuclear is going to give us three-eyed fishes versus going back to medieval times, those are the two fear questions. And which of those is more immediate and accurate, and which is more sort of anxious, and I don't know, it's almost like a hidden fear that is unknown and unknowable that keeps getting brought up by these charlatans that say it's going to kill you. It's a silent, deadly, invisible somewhere. What parts of Earth as a nuclear planet get into that idea, the genetic damage? Is there any bit of daylight on that subject?
Oh, definitely. I have the chapter 9, 10, and 11 go into that specifically. And then chapter 11 turned into 20,000 words. And I'm like, well, damn, this is a separate little companion book. And so I went off and wrote what I call the L&T report, which is a companion book for Earth as a Nuclear Planet. And L&T is linear no threshold. And the subtitle is how the linear no threshold model of radiation safety made the world afraid of nuclear power. There's a very specific history as to how and why people got afraid of radiation, which of course then that means they're afraid of nuclear power. But there's a guy named Herman Muller who came up with the linear no threshold hypothesis. It taps into some really deep psychological stuff when you talk about nuclear energy, sci-fi stories of death rays and mad scientists and that sort of a thing. There's a lot of things deep in the human psyche about wielding vast amounts of power. So that's one thing. Whereas wind and solar is like, well, there's not enough power. You couldn't even zap a frog with that thing. Don't worry about it, you know? And so it's all safe. But so there is a deep, almost Jungian mythological concern about alchemy and wielding death rays and stuff like that. But on the science surface of it, Herman Muller in the 1927 came up with a flatly provably wrong misconception, and that might be a redundant statement, that all radiation is harmful, that there is no safe dose, and the damage was cumulative. And all of these things are flatly provably incorrect. And so the L&T report goes through the history of how this came to be, how this erroneous idea got embedded in modern science, and then how it got supersized by a guy named Ed Lewis, who went, not only is all radiation dangerous, but it could also create cancer in your own lifetime. Because Muller's idea was, oh yeah, radiation is dangerous, and if you get zapped enough, then you're going to have heritable radiation damage that you're going to give to your offspring. So you don't want to get zapped because your offspring will have like three-eyed fishes kind of a thing. And then the next summer, Lewis came along and went, and you can also get cancer from it. And right there, it went into hyperdrive. And the obvious solution was to clamp down on any man-made source of radiation because you can't stop the natural ones, but you can sure stop the man-made ones like reactors and bombs.
If it's natural, it's God's will, right? Of course.
Right.
And so it's, you know...
Whereas nuclear is the work of the devil.
Right. It's like our sex ed policy. So if those kids get a disease, well, it's their moral failing. And if we teach them about sex, then we are causing the harm.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't win. You can't win for losing. So you asked about Earth as a Nuclear Planet. The middle of the book goes into the erroneous concept of linear no threshold and how it made people afraid of nuclear power. And I just thought it was such a fascinating subject that I did an even deeper dive. And the L&T report is about 100 pages, and it's basically, it reads like a true crime story. It just takes you through who said what paper said what happened at what meeting, how this science got falsified, how it got misinterpreted. The L&T report is like a true crime novel.
Wow.
And if you could summarize really quick, what is the truth about radiation in our daily lives? How dangerous is it in our daily lives?
Well, radiation is a very weak carcinogen. There's a lot better ways of getting cancer than hanging around radioactive material. A U.S. nuclear power plant is consistently rated as one of the safest work environments in the nation. Let's take a look at the three big disasters that made people afraid of nuclear power. 3 Mile Island. 3 Mile Island was a steam release with a partial meltdown. The average downwind dose was less than a human chest x-ray.
Mm-hmm. And you had to be standing at the perimeter to get that.
Yeah. And the thing is a lot of people are old enough to remember 3 Mile Island and the national freakout and the No Nukes concerts that were attended by a total of 300,000 people around the country. And the whole thing was, oh my God, we can't allow this to happen again. Well, basically, the country freaked out because of an unscheduled chest x-ray.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's look at Chernobyl. Number one, no one will ever build a reactor like that again. It was a shitty design, pardon my French. And there was a graphite core rather than a water core, and graphite is flammable, and it had no containment dome. And so the thing overheated and caught on fire and blew the lid, and there was no containment dome. The total recorded verifiable deaths from Chernobyl is about 60. Not 1 million. One interesting thing is that the 300,000 liquidators the people that went in briefly and spent 90 seconds of their life removing a piece of nasty stuff, and then they got retired. They, as a population group, have a 15 to 30% lower cancer rate than the general population. No one will ever build a reactor like Chernobyl again. And bringing up Chernobyl as a reason not to do nuclear is like bringing up the Ford Pinto as a reason why cars are dangerous. No car company will ever build a gas tank like that again. Mm-hmm. Just like no reactor company will ever build a reactor like Chernobyl again, but try to convince people of that. There's this irrational presumption that someone's going to go out and build another reactor like Chernobyl. Are you freaking kidding?
It's a straw man, literally a straw reactor, a reactor that existed, but it is brought up again and again as an example of what we're actually not doing.
Well, exactly. And then take a look at Fukushima. To understand Fukushima, you have to understand Onagawa. What the hell is Onagawa? Onagawa was a plant with 4 reactors that was the closest to the epicenter. It was up the coast, north up the coast from Fukushima. Nothing happened at Onagawa. Why? Because their generators were put on high ground. Let's look at Fukushima. The knuckleheads that built that place excavated the site to 10 meters above sea level from 35 meters above sea level, and then they put the generators in a basement on the beach in a known tsunami zone. Mm-hmm. You've heard of what a Sendai stone is? You know what that is? Oh. In Japan, they had those old granite markers that are chiseled with a warning. And they're called Sendai stones because they originated in the town of Sendai. And basically, it's a chisel warning from the 16th century. It's like, don't build on the beach because of tall waves. Okay? The town of Sendai is between the town of Onagawa and Fukushima, which is a real bitter irony. So basically, Fukushima was built in the country that coined the word tsunami. They put their backup generators in a basement on the beach.
As a cost-saving measure.
As a cost-saving measure, right. Yeah, because it's easier and cheaper to bring in material by sea. Mm-hmm. And the Japanese, so if you take all the hydropower dams in the United States, and if all the reservoirs are full, and if they all ran to dry, there'd be X amount of energy, right? Mm-hmm. So he claims that as part of his backup, which is like, I'm trying to be polite here, but it's highly unethical to claim something like that. Number one, the maximum discharge is 89 gigawatts an hour. He has a 1,179 gigawatt average grid that he proposes. So he's looking at, even if, like, let's say there's a cloudy day all over the United States and his wind and solar doesn't work, and he goes, let's use the dams. They will provide 7.5% of the energy needed that he claims we need. So that means all the rich people's lights get to stay on, and everybody else can go screw themselves. I mean, it doesn't make sense because it's all filtered through the generators in those dams, number one. Number two, he's presuming that all the hydropower dams in the country go, oh, yeah, sure, you need energy. We'll just like open the taps and flood everybody downstream. And there goes that guy's crop. And there goes that guy's resort because you need energy. It's an incredibly offensively presumptuous and deceptive statement that he has 13 days of backup. And you don't really understand it as you dig into his stuff and compare this chart with that chart. And Tim was the one who was really good at that, man. He just digs into there. It's like, this number doesn't make sense with this number. Oh, that's why he did it. He must have done that, blah, 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 which Jacobson doesn't explain, but we ferreted out, didn't just figure out. So Jacobson has a wind and solar grid with 13 to 14 hours of electricity backup, but he claims 13 days, which is a frickin' lie. Mm-hmm. And so everybody says, oh, problem solved. We have all the bullshit. Sorry, it's bad science. It is. It's provably bad science. And we use his numbers to show you that his plan is BS. That's what Roadmap to Nowhere is, the third book that's coming out. Okay. Wonderful. And it should be out hopefully in the fall.
And is Roadmap to Nowhere also a Generation Atomic publication?
Yes.
Oh,
yes.
Wonderful.
We put it online in 2017 as an online book, and that was based on his original roadmap. And then he revised his roadmap. And then we're like, well, now we got to revise Roadmap to Nowhere. So we did. And again, we used all his numbers except battery operation and maintenance, and we imported $3 trillion worth of perfect transmission. We're like, yeah, it's perfect, baby. You got to pay for it because we don't need it.
So tell us a little bit about the publication that's coming in 1 month, and we're going to make it available where? GenerationAtomic.com? Is it going to be on Amazon? What are the details?
Oh, it's going to be on Amazon. It'll be a whole book launch. It'll be like a trade paperback.
Wonderful.
And its companion book will come out maybe in September, and I'm going to do the audiobook. And the attitude or the approach I took is like writing a long letter to my sister explaining to her about all this groovy stuff I found out. And so I'm explaining to a regular person how this stuff works. So some people have criticized it of not being erudite enough. And I'm like, screw erudite. Nobody's going to read erudite. I want my plumber to understand this stuff.
Thank you so much for being with us today. This has been the Ecomodernist Channel Live with Mike Conley. His book, Earth is a Nuclear Planet, is going to be published in August of 2023 via Generation Atomic Press. You will find it on Amazon. We will have a great book launch. Hopefully, I'll see you on many other press tours and interviews in the future. Mike, thank you so much for your time today.
Hey, man, it was fun. I enjoyed it.
The Ecomodernist Channel Live broadcasts every 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern on Sundays. We'll be on YouTube. You can find us at Ecomodernist1. That's the Ecomodernist channel. You can find us on twitch.tv at Soyaddle, on kick.com at Soyaddle, on DLive at Thorium252, and on many other live streaming services, as well as the Ecomodernist Society of North America at Facebook, and ESNA, that's ESNA.earth. Thank you so much, everyone, for your contributions, your chat messages, and your support. You can make donations to esna.earth. We have a donation link. We are now an official 501c3. When you purchase Earth as a Nuclear Planet, you can, of course, choose Generation Atomic as your Amazon Smile beneficiary. Thanks, everyone.
Please subscribe to us on YouTube, Ecomodernist channel. Also to subscribe to us on Twitter and Facebook, Ecomodernist Society of North America.
And online at https://esna.earth.